Hello, everybody. I am Michelle Cheslow, and I am an expat South African. I travel there frequently. My family still lives there, and it was always a fascinating place to live. Lots of dichotomies, which we'll discuss further into the program. Anyway, first of all, what is a litvak? A litvak is something.
Wait, you just revealed the
answer.
Let's no
All
problem.
right, Woody, sorry.
No problem. No, this is we're winging this. As
My first time on doing this on Zoom. So
me too. So there you go. Okay.
So please bear with us here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
You go.
You're on. Go ahead. Continue.
Okay. So
the answer is
Lithuania.
Yay.
And Jews who come from Lithuania are called Litvaks. And what are some of the character traits of a Litvak?
Stubbornness.
Well, that typical character traits of a Litvak are warm-hearted, generous, practical, hospitable, very high standards and expectations, particularly of oneself, a love of learning, combined sometimes with a critical attitude to religious tradition, staunchly Zionistic. Those were the values with which I grew up. A very tight-knit community, more about that later. So why did these Litvaks travel Dafka to South Africa? And we're talking about the years between mostly 1880 to 1914. So at that time, a lot of the Jews from that area were traveling across to the US and to the UK and other parts in Europe. Why South Africa? Well, first of all, the migration to South Africa was unique because about 85% of the immigrants in South Africa come from one area in Lithuania. And if you look on your map, you'll see a place that says Kaunas, which is the modern day term, the modern term, we know it as Kovna. And all these places around it, except for Vilnius, are considered the Kovna municipality governorship. All the Jews in South Africa come from this area. So it's a very homogeneous society. It's called chain migration. You would come, you would tell your cousin about it, he would come and tell his cousin, and so on and so forth, until the whole family would eventually get out there. 40,000 of them came during this period of time, which actually increased the population there tenfold. There were only about 4,000 people living in South Africa at that time. So 40,000 people made a very big difference. They left Lithuania due to poverty, anti-Semitism, and conscription, and went to South Africa for a variety of reasons. The biggest one of which was what South Africa had to offer at that time, which was its minerals. South Africa, diamonds were discovered in 1867. Actually, a Lithuanian Jew had come to look for diamonds in 1869. And within just 12 years, he had built a foundation of industrial coal mines with which he lured to bring people from the whole Kovna area. And come they did. In addition to the diamonds, gold was discovered in 1886 in Johannesburg, also known as Joburg, which excited a gold fever and ignited a boom city for over 100,000 people. The opportunity to make it big in boom cities was a magnet for poor Lithuanians. And indeed, Jews became the pioneers in both the diamond and gold industry. Both new immigrants and those Jews who were already in Cape Town went to Johannesburg, descended upon it to make it huge. Joburg became so heavily settled with Jews that it also became known as Jewburg. Okay, why was the immigration so successful to South Africa? Jews were successful because they were literate and numerate. They had been businessmen of a sort back home in the form of peddling and dealing with farmers on a daily basis. They were familiar with commerce, Although Joburg was a magnet for them in the early days, afterwards, many of them farmed out to small towns called dorps. They began businesses there, just like they did at home, engaging with the local population in another language. From peddling there, they opened smaller stores, then bigger general stores, then huge department stores, built hotels, and created empires in many industries. Interestingly, many Jews were, for the most part, never part of the proletariat for long. In America, especially in New York in the Lower East Side, Jews were Jews were the labor in, for example, the garment district. Being that the racial dynamics were so different in South Africa, Jews had cheap black labor that they could readily use to build their businesses. And they exploited this pool of workers to help them build business, and they also sold cheap goods and services to them. So they were able to really grow in size and in wealth much more easily than in other countries. Because of this ease with commerce and business, almost no socialist politics took place on a broad scale. And you can see in the slide over here, this just gives you an overview of the kinds of people who came. Although they look like well, the men you can see are dressed in suits and ties. One has the idea that a lot of these immigrants were kind of country bumpkins, but in fact, the immigration took place not directly from a shtetl, but Jews would go from their shtetl to a small town, from a town to a city, and eventually from a city, take a train across to the ships that brought them to wherever they were going. So they had already had quite a bit of experience living outside their shtetl. They were pretty savvy. Okay. So what did Jews do in South Africa? What was their place? Before the movie took place, which was in 1963, so I'll go back now to the early 20s, 30s, and 40s. Jews were indeed involved in the formation of workers' unions. This is something that they had brought with them from the old land. They didn't organize fellow Jews, but they helped the poor blacks in South Africa. There were some who brought radical politics with them from Eastern Europe. But in South Africa, the major social, political questions were racial. And so they put all their efforts into equalizing and getting rid of white supremacy and making anything more fair towards the blacks. So the unions were for racial reasons, not for Jews per se. And their early forms of resistance were against white and racial supremacy.
South Africa leave from Hamburg.
Okay. So the socialist politics had limited expression. For many Jews, Zionist politics were also very important. Being a Zionist in South Africa never was seen as a loyalty issue as it was elsewhere in other countries that Jews lived in. And this Zionism formed the central component of Jewish identity, a kind of civic religion. It gave the new immigrant community a sense of purpose. It was always a very tight-knit community. This was now moving along to the 30s. The Quota Act of 1930 restricted entry of Jews into South Africa. And by 1937, Jews were prevented entirely from immigrating. The Boers or Afrikaners had allied themselves with the Nazi movement in Germany and had now become quite anti-Semitic. This anti-Semitism was interesting though, because there was a dual kind of fascination with the Jews. First of all, the jealousy felt by the Afrikaners was towards the economic success of the Jews, both on a large and small scale. And there was this love-hate relationship towards them. They respected them for being people of the book, and they approved of Zionism because it matched their own aspirations for a homeland. So they kind of admired them on the one hand and really resented them on the other hand. Jews always had a lot of economic power. They'd never had political power. That's how it was kind of divided. So you'll see that generally speaking, Lithuanian Jews pushed away from socialism to Zionism, pushed away from socialism to business, pushed away from reform to orthodoxy or more traditional Jewish practice. More about the kinds of the way Jewish expression was found, I'll talk to you about when I tell you what it was like when I was growing up there. Jews were involved in the Communist Party of South Africa, which was officially formed in 1941, but had really been active 20 years earlier under the Communist International banner. There was even a special Jewish Workers' Club, which gave socialist support for newly arrived immigrants. Initially, Jews had joined the party because of the impact of the Russian Revolution, which ended in 1923. But in the 30s, they joined because of growing fascism seen on the streets of the big cities. The Communist Party of South Africa grew after World War II and was the only multiracial party, comprised the majority of Africans. For Africans, it was the only party in where they had a voice. The party was opposed to fascism, and it was this, plus the Holocaust and World War II, that drew this generation of radicals to join. There were about 2,000 members, only 150 were whites, most of them were Jews. Many of these Jews were also atheists and had felt alienated from the traditional Jewish community. They saw themselves more as internationalists and may even have been embarrassed by being Jewish. Okay. Do you want to go on to the next slide, Udi? Oh, okay. Okay, so I'm going to talk now a little bit about my experience growing up there. Okay, we're still not at the point where this movie was, where the movie took place. That was in 1963. The nationalist government came to power in 1948. That was the official start of apartheid, which was a separation, a complete separation of blacks or non-whites and non-whites. If you were not white, then you were a non. You were non-white. You were colored, either mixed race, or you were black, or you were Indian. You were not white. And I was born in 1957, so the Nationalist Party had been in existence for about 11 years. I grew up for my first, until I was a teenager, I had lived in an area where, well, first of all, everyone I knew was Jewish. Everybody in my community, all my parents' friends came from the same place, almost at the same time on the same boat. So it was a very close, tight-knit community. We didn't live next door to each other. The area was much bigger, but everybody knew what was going on in everyone else's life. I was the eldest of 4 children. My father was a dentist. My father was a staunch nationalist, which was very unusual for Jews in those days. People did not readily admit to being nationalist, even though everybody benefited from this evil regime. They would always on the face of it say how terrible it was, and they would never support it, but they kind of did because that's how they all grew wealthy, on the backs of very cheap labor. Anyway, I went to a Jewish day school called Herzliya, which is still in existence today. It was a very Zionistic school. We did very little religious studies per se, 1 hour of Torah a day, which was very light and superficial, very Zionistic. The thrust was Israel. Growing up at home, we never discussed the political situation. I did not come from a house where politics was really discussed. In fact, I would say that I was pretty unaware of what was going on until I joined Habonim Youth Movement. And it was there that our awarenesses and our consciences started developing. However, there was always a feeling amongst me and my friends that we were not here to stay. signs like this that you would see, you know, reserved for whites. Black people never took the same buses as white people. They were never seen on the beach unless they were handing out chairs and lollipops. They were in your house, in your kitchen as your domestic, but they never used your bathroom. God forbid they drank from your coffee cup. It was all, they had their own room outside the house where they had their own amenities and their own cutlery and everything. They were not part of the house. They were not invited ever to sit at the table. They were clearly your servants. Signs like this made me very uncomfortable. I didn't like the way I saw a lot of Black domestic people being treated. We all had the feeling that we were there temporarily. We just knew I wanted to leave when I was 18 and was told by my mother that I could only leave when I was either married or had a degree. So taking the lesser of the two risks, I took a degree and then I emigrated and I went to Israel. That's where most of us went. I went on a one-way ticket. My parents were not thrilled at all about me leaving at 21. The Zionist Federation, which was a very large organization, paid for my ticket. And it wasn't long after that I actually got married. But growing up there, I went to a Jewish day school. So I had a very strong sense of Jewish identity. Like I said earlier, I didn't have any non-Jewish friends. Even having gone to university, we kind of, drifted towards people who were more like us. And I was not active at university. Some of my friends were. I have friends whose siblings were banned for political involvement. But it all felt very temporary. So it was kind of, you were always living with one foot in and one foot out, which did give you a sense of insecurity because you knew that nothing was, you know, permanent. Anyway, that was my life in a nutshell. The school I went to and all the schools in the country, actually, you had to wear a uniform because that was like the British model. Everything felt very regimented. I did not know about this trial. Of course, I was only 6 or 7 at the time. Don't forget, there was no television in South Africa. So the only way we could see anything was by reading the newspaper, and the papers weren't exactly about to, you know, broadcast things that they didn't want people to see. Censorship was very strict. We were kind of living in a police state. And I think Jews always felt that they did well there. They were always grateful to the government for having given them an opportunity. They were always mindful of anti-Semitism in other places. And so everyone kind of behaved themselves. Coming now to this movie. Okay. So this Umkhonto we Sizwe, also known as MK, was the militant arm of the ANC. The ANC is the African National Congress, which was formed in the 1920s, headed by Mandela. And they had tried for years to get some kind of footing in the country, and they had never anyone to negotiate with. All the governments in power had never had any interest in giving any kind of voice to the blacks. And so they felt that by 1961, after the nationalist government had been in power for 13 years, that there was really no option other than turning violent. The ANC had not started out as a violent organization, but when they saw that there was no other choice because all their peaceful protests resulted in even more restrictions and punishments for Africans, they felt that they didn't have a choice. The MK, the Umkhonto we Sizwe, was not under the influence of the Communist Party. Both the ANC and the Communist Party wanted to destroy the apartheid system. Mandela said that he always believed in a constitutional democracy and a market economy. He was not following, you know, the principles of Marxism and any other kind of communism coming out of Russia at the time. Okay, so what was very interesting about this film is that you have a man called Bram Fischer, who was himself a communist. He was actually the chairman of the Communist Party, but he's an Afrikaner. He's not English. Most of his group, most of his people did not, they were staunch nationalists. They did not support the ANC or any kind of black rule or any kind of black voice in any government at all. And so the fact that he was their defense lawyer and that he was a communist was really a very unique set of circumstance. Unfortunately, he paid heavily for it, with his life. And I won't give everything away because some of you haven't seen the movie. But he was a man of inordinate courage and quite brilliant. When he was thrown off the case, his assistant was Arthur Cheslow, also a Jewish man, and he and Mandela actually became very close friends, and he became Attorney General under Mandela's rule. Percy Utah, here on the right, was a Jew from Johannesburg who really worked with government. He was a nationalist, and he firmly believed that what the MK and the ANC were doing was wrong. He, unlike the others, he was lauded by the Jewish community for his role. He was heavily praised, and he was rewarded afterwards by becoming the head of the Orthodox Union in Johannesburg, and by becoming, I believe he became also Attorney General under the Nats. He got a very high post under the nationalist government after prosecuting these men. His defense, he said, was that he actually helped the Rivonia defendants by not charging them with treason, which would have been a death sentence, but he instead charged them with sabotage. And that landed them in jail as opposed to the death sentence. So he felt that he had done a very fair and good job for them. He had sort of felt vindicated. And this is a picture here of Robben Island, where the defendants in the Rivonia trial, Mandela amongst them, was sent for varying amounts of time. It's interesting to note that in the trial itself, you'll see that the white people who are in the dock are all Jews, whether they are atheists or identifying themselves somewhat as Jews. They are all Jews. They were all shunned by the community. The formal Jewish community was mortified that they were doing this, and they were very afraid to rock the boat, and therefore they completely disowned these people. Names like Lionel Bernstein, Dennis Goldberg, Arthur Goldrich, they were completely disowned. They weren't allowed to come into synagogues. Their families were given no support while they were in jail, or in cases where they were banned. They were branded as communists, and they were distanced from the community.
Okay. So now we have a poll to see how well, pop quiz to see if how many of you know how long was Mandela in prison for? How many years of his life sentence did Nelson Mandela serve?
Okay.
Okay, we're going to end the polling now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Whoa, good job.
Okay.
Nice, good job.
Go ahead.
I
The
did your
correct
homework.
answer was?
27.
Yes.
27 years. So I'm sure many of you know this picture. This is Nelson Mandela and his wife Winnie at the end of his release. When he was released, at the end of his imprisonment, and when he was released, February 11th, 1990. And that day might ring a bell, that same date, not that year, but that date might ring a bell, because actually, this is a little sidebar, it's the same date that Anatoly Sharansky was
Oh.
released from his prison. So it's quite a meaningful date in, you know, for me anyway, with my dual identities. So Mandela was released, and you'll see he's giving that same hand salute, the Amandla salute that you see in the movie. And of course, there was great celebration. It was a fantastic time, great optimism in the country. Not enough credit was given to de Klerk, who was the ruling president at that time, who did a yeoman's effort in working in getting him released. And they actually had quite a decent relationship. Mandela, of course, became the president 4 years later. And here you can see a picture of him and Arthur Cheslow, his former defense attorney. And on the right, you see him with Joe Slovo, another Jew who actually spent many years in exile after the trial. He did not go to prison, and he came back in 1990 and took quite a high part in Mandela's government. And they also remain friends forever. Okay, so this is a story written by Daniela Cheslow. Yes, she is a relation. She's my daughter. And she wrote an article about, she interviewed the sons of Percy Utah and Arthur Cheslow. And it makes for a very interesting read, because you'll see how Utah's son was really branded and shackled by his father's name. He lives with a lot of regret, and hasn't really managed to overcome that shame. Didn't really amount to what he wanted to do. Lives in a small place, you'll see. Whereas Cheslow-son's son has such pride. His father's name is revered, and he too he was a lawyer. He's also become an activist, and he lives with the pride of his father's name. So two boys living in the shadow of their father in very different ways, which is very interesting. And today,
Michelle, I just pushed a link to that article in the chat, and at the end, I'll show you folks how to download the chat. So if you're interested, you can read this article in Tablet Magazine.
Thank you. Okay, so Mandela's relationship with the Jews once he became president was interesting. You know, Mandela, people were critical of Mandela's support of the Palestinians when he was president, but he was always very pro-Israel. He always believed that Jews were entitled to a land of their own. He just also was very concerned about the Palestinians' fate, and he tried to, you know, always defend them, but not at the expense of putting down Israel. He did believe in Israel's right to exist. He did not go there while he was president. I think he probably felt it was just too dicey with the Palestinian issue. But after he was president, he did go there. And here you see a picture of him with that, you know, that same old power fist, with members of the community, amongst whom is Cyril Harris, the chief rabbi, who actually performed the nuptials at Mandela's third wedding. So Mandela also felt that Jews were much more open-minded than other whites were. He was always eternally grateful to a Jewish lawyer by the name of Lazar Sadelsky for giving him an opportunity to train as a lawyer in the early 40s, something that no other white man had done. It was very unusual for a black man to be training as a lawyer in the office of a white person, and they remained very firm friends to the end. And Sadelsky really did a huge mitzvah for the Jewish community, in that he showed Nelson what Jews really were like, and Mandela took a lot of he formed a lot of his beliefs about Jews based on that transaction. So it was a very good thing for everyone.
All right. Yeah, we have that. Shall I launch the poll now about the Jewish population? We have another pop quiz. How many Jews lived in South Africa when the Jewish community was at its peak? Okay.
All right.
They got it.
Excellent. Good job.
120,000.
Wow. That's excellent.
Sadly, today that number is less than half, basically due to immigration and aging. The 60s, 70s, and 80s were turbulent times for the country. And I think the combination of Israel providing a haven for Jews and them having money and being able to come to, to places like America and Australia offered them an option for leaving. And many did. And if they didn't go, certainly people like myself, I went in the late 70s, I left. And when I go to the local, the Jewish cemetery today, I actually know more people underground than I do walking above ground, because so many of my friends have left. The community continues to shrink. The last couple of years have been very difficult for people as well. And with the advent of Lithuania and other Eastern European countries joining the EU, and Jews able to get passports from the lands of their grandparents, this has opened up options for Jews to leave to places like the UK, which, we're still part of the EU. And so we have this continuing migration of Jews from South Africa. Now it's more, the young ones are going more to England, but still they're going to Israel, and where possible, they're still coming here into Australia. But there is always this slow drain out of South Africa. The community today, like I say, is aging. Jewish identity is still very strong. Strong institutions still operate from cradle to grave. The Litvaks brought all their institutions with them and set them up there. You have many day schools in Cape Town, Joburg, and some of the smaller towns. You have, developing in the 90s, a lot more Orthodox yeshivas, some in Cape Town, mostly in Johannesburg. Today, 75% of Jewish kids attend Jewish schools. So Jewish life there is very, very rich. And because the community is small and it's very intact, they're all very involved. Synagogues there are mostly what they call Orthodox. I think we would call it more conservative, except men and women sit separately. You have one or two reform. Reform's not very big in South Africa, not at all like it is in America. So, Jewish education is still valued over there. Holidays are celebrated, but there is the continual feeling of we're not going to be here for long. And just like in my generation, my sister, who is quite a bit younger than me, well, 5 years younger than me, her friends, and even those that are younger than her, are in the same situation where almost all of them have at least one or maybe all of their children living abroad. But it's a beautiful country. It's, as you can see, this is our iconic Table Mountain. This is the view that greeted Lithuanians in the boat when they pulled up to the harbor, and knowing what they knew about the gold and diamond and cheap labor, having this kind of backdrop didn't hurt at all. It was beautiful. And that's basically it. I mean, I have run, I know that Ellie Ehrlich is on here, and she came on one of my tours. I do tours to South Africa. I go back very often. I have my mother still lives there, my sister's there. In fact, she may even be on here, I'm not sure. I love to do tours there and introduce people to the community, to the Jewish Member of Parliament, to show them the site, show them the history. That's Robben Island staring at you through those glasses, which are meant to be the glasses of Mandela, looking out at where his home was, or his prison was, for 27 years. And that really concludes what I have to say, and I'd love to hear if you have any questions.
Okay. So I'm going to push the email address to chat. Your chat window, and again, you can download that after. Okay, anyone have questions? You can unmute yourself and just speak up, or you can send it in chat if you like.
Is the identity of Jews in South Africa still strongly Zionist, or has it changed to something more religious?
The identity is still Zionistic. The intensity of the Zionism isn't as strong as it was when I lived there. They are more critical of Israel. The government, of course, is very critical of Israel. The Orthodox was not something, I mean, when I say Orthodox now, I'm talking about Orthodoxy as we know it. I'm talking about Hasidic, I'm talking about, you know, ultra-Orthodox. It wasn't, when I grew up, it wasn't there. It just simply wasn't there. This is something that's developed since the 90s. But there is still a very strong affinity for Israel. If it's as strong as it was when I was there, I don't think so, but it does definitely still exist. The Jews always viewed as white within the racial structure. Yes. Why did Jews become English speakers? Is that the question?
Rather than Afrikaans.
Well, they lived in the cities. Okay, they were more liberal. South Africa, the society was divided up into the English and Afrikaans. English were they were more the economic and professional section of the population. The Afrikaners had the political power. And when I grew up, I mean, I used to look at Afrikaners with great disdain because I couldn't stand their politics. And there was this huge divide. You did have Jews who went to these, what is called dorps, who became very friendly with the Afrikaners or Boers, who fought in the Boer War, who are known as Boere Jode or Afrikaans Jews. But not to say that Jews don't speak Afrikaans. We were all forced to speak Afrikaans. We had to learn it at school. We went to school. I learned 3 languages at school, but all the public schools, you learn 2 languages, English and Afrikaans. There were 2 national languages. So I think we were all sort of bilingual, but depended where the Jews went to. And when they went to synagogue, it was always English and Hebrew. So Afrikaans didn't really feature.
Anyone else?
I noted in the film that the conversations amongst the defendants and their attorneys floated between Afrikaans.
They intermixed.
They were constantly
They
switching.
constantly switching.
More than
They were
that.
code switching.
Constantly.
Yes, this was very interesting how it was all done in how most of it was done in Afrikaans. I've never seen a movie about South Africa done in Afrikaans. I can only think that maybe because Braam was essentially Afrikaans, although he spoke a fluent English, and maybe because it was an eyesore, you know, like you were sticking it in the eye of the defendants, that it was in Afrikaans, because obviously Afrikaans would have been anathema to them. And in fact, a few years after that, there were huge riots about Black people having to learn Afrikaans in their schools. They protested until it stopped. Because Xhosa or any kind of Black language was never ever taught to them or to us, even though, you know, we were such a minority. We never learned their languages. Udi, I don't know if there were other questions that I missed because they pop up very quick.
So in what way was Braam Afrikaans if he was Jewish? He was not.
Braam was not Jewish. His name was Abraham, but he was not Jewish.
I don't think so. He didn't look Jewish.
Oh, here we go. Okay, that one's answered. What is the relationship between Afrikaners and Jews today? Black South Africans and Jews. There always was anti-Semitism there. Sometimes it was more subtle. Other times it's more, more felt. The big issue today is, of course, Israel, because the government is very anti-Israel. Afrikaners and Jews always got along. Now there's just fewer Jews to get along with because there are just so few of them. So I think that their relationship is fine. And Black South Africa and Jews, that also goes up and down. We do have a Black member of parliament. We go through periods when Jews do feel very insecure, and that then leads to, an immigration. But when I go there, I'm always told you've got to be very careful about, violence. I myself have not encountered it. I don't feel any kind of anti-Semitism walking around the streets. I think today there is a big push on the part of extreme Black parties to get things back from the whites, not from the Jews per se. So I think Jews are seen more as whites than they are as Jews.
We had a question of how widely is it known that the government had a role in Brahm's death? At the end, spoiler alert, at the end of the film, you see them sort of, that you were told that they neglected him in prison and denied him medical care.
Oh, I think that they were completely complicit.
But how widely is that known?
I can't answer that question honestly.
Okay. Can you answer it dishonestly?
I'll answer it dishonestly and say I don't think it was widely known.
Okay.
Was not.
Don't forget, things were kept quiet from us. It wasn't like we had a reporter with a camera in the middle of all these things. This was 1963. So what did we know? We knew nothing. Things were kept so quiet. We never had TV. The papers were a joke. The radio didn't speak about things that it didn't want to speak about. Censorship was so strict that I'm sure at the time this wouldn't even have been broadcast.
Okay.
All
right.
They came from Lithuania. Wouldn't Yiddish speakers learn Afrikaans easily? Possibly. They probably had to learn it. They learned it in school. So I'm not saying that they didn't speak Afrikaans. When you say that you're English speaking, I speak Afrikaans, but I'm an English speaking person. I don't identify at all with anything Afrikaans in the country, except to make jokes with my brother, who might be on this call as well. So it was a language that you mocked. When you wanted to sort of tease them, you would talk like them, or because they don't speak like us. They have their very strong accent, and it's very different. And you can tell right away who's English and who's Afrikaans. And you make assumptions, which we all do about people based on certain traits and characteristics.
Let's do a last question. Is there a free press now in South Africa?
Yes, there is. Now there's television. Of course, they have cable. Now it's up to speed. They have what we have. It's totally open now.
All right.
Do we have a free press?
All right. Do we have a free press? All right.
Free to do what is the question.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Let me just explain